刚才我们在Jenny 的这个分享当中，我不知道各位听了她的分享，印象最深刻的是什么？那今天汤哥在这边，我觉得我要特别讲一件事情，像 Jenny 讲的，一般我们在谈儿童影视节目的时候，我们会想到知识性，我们会想到教育性，但 Jenny 强调一件事情，让儿少看的节目。3个最重要的点当中，他提出了 entertaining， 它必须要有娱乐性。所以从 Jenny 分享的这个投影片里面，我们看到很多专属为儿少打造的 drama， 为儿少来打造的戏剧。那我今天在收到福版文教基金会收到冷冰给我的资料之后，我才意识到，冷冰跟整个基金会到底有多努力、多认真，因为。容我这样子跟大家介绍这件事情，比方说今天在台上的这个4位除了我担任主持人之外，在我左手边的这个 Marney， 他是来自加拿大，他是美洲的代表。然后刚才的 Jenny， 他是南半球来自澳洲，他是澳洲的代表。以及在最左手边 Kalle， 他是来自挪威，所以他是欧洲的代表。那在这个台上。就有来自4大洲的代表，如同刚才 Jenny 在演说讲的时候，我相信我们也心有戚戚焉。不仅在澳洲，在台湾的影视内容，很长时间都是他提到的所谓的充斥着 American culture， 就是被美国的文化所宰制。那这件事情对于台上的4个州来讲，我相信我们都感同身受。今天就要透过来自3位不同国家、不同地区的这个分享，来看一下究竟一样是国家政策，在他们的国家里面对影视产业有什么重要性，然后带来了哪些改变跟影响。在接下来这个将近1个小时的我们的论坛当中，大家随时可以根据台上讲者的提问，扫这个 QR code 来提出你各自的问题。如果当你要提问的时候，你发现这个问题已经有人提过，你也可以在他的问题底下按赞，这样会增加他被往前推播的机会。所以到时候那个问题可能很快就会跳出来，也就是说你很快就会得到这个问题的答案。那接下来我们开始今天的这个论坛。首先我就要依序我刚才在介绍的时候提到的这个问题，我想请教 Jenny。我相信不止我会好奇。为什么娱乐性会变成是我们在制作儿少节目的内容时这么重要的一个指标
？Thank you very much. I think it's about the power of stories which entertain, and they stay with us for longer. In many ways, they are more profoundly educational than educational programs which are designed for that purpose, because they teach us about the human experience and put us in someone else's shoes. But also I think the standards are treating children with respect and with the citizens that they are, entitled to their own stories and entertainment, as opposed to being on some kind of conveyor belt where they're being prepared for life. Childhood is life, and it's really important that they be engaged. But I think the connection to entertaining programs, and especially drama, runs much deeper than a classic educational program which is perhaps trying to tell a didactic message. And the proof of that is that people are still watching those programs, or they stand the test of time, and a new group of children can watch a program that was made 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, and if it was made really well with really good production values, they'll still engage with it. So I just think drama and entertainment is a much more profound proposition, actually. It sounds, we think of it as being perhaps more frivolous, but I actually think it's a much more profound proposition, especially if we are wanting to celebrate and engage in our culture.
是 Jenny 的回答。那我也很好奇，这样的状态是只有在澳洲， 还是在挪威或者是在加拿大，一样会很重视包括儿童影视产业娱乐性这件事情。
In Canada, it would be very similar to Australia in the sense that whether it's drama or nonfiction live action shows, the audience of children are savvy consumers of content. They know quality. In a world now where they're consuming choices on tablets, where they get to control what they watch, they know instantly if something is of quality and whether it speaks to them. So the idea that you can do education it's so possible to do education within a drama. There's lots to learn within a live action series set in the outdoor nature. There's lots to learn, and all of them can link to education. But it doesn't mean that they're a traditional, boring, didactic show, because any strong content creator in today's landscape knows that I think the data was something like you have 6 or maybe it's 8 seconds until a child will decide not to watch your show. So you really have to be having the quality to grab their attention, and that means you need to entertain them. But you can succeed at that and educate at the same time.
我补充介绍一下，其实，在 Marney 任内的时候，他当时是任职在 TVO Kids 的总监，那也就是我们很熟悉那个汪汪队。我相信这个很多家长都知道这个节目。那我接着想要请教，如你所提到的，同时兼顾娱乐性跟教育性、知识性，是一件在儿少节目上可行的做法。你能不能给我们一个，在你过往，我看到你有将近40年的儿少节目的制作经验，有没有什么实际的例子可以跟现场的观众来分享？然后在过程当中，你们是怎么样达到这个目标的？
Very good question, very complicated answer. Paw Patrol was, the TV Ontario, or TVO as it's known as now, and TVO Kids, where I was working for more years than I'll probably admit to, was a fortunate broadcaster that was in the right place at the right time. The creators of Paw Patrol were looking for a broadcaster to join the program because in Canada you get different governmental tax breaks and different ways to make your financial plan work depending upon who is giving the money and what the project is. So therefore for TVO they were lucky they got in on a ground floor of a cute animated series with no knowledge it was going to be the mega hit it became. But that said, right from the very beginning, TVO would not have been able to go in on that show if we couldn't have seen the clear connections to learning. Every show that was on that channel, whether it's the linear channel or all the various platforms today, all have an educator or a consultant that works on the particular series and can show the connections to the learning that would happen to kids. The programming is not necessarily used in classrooms. It could be, but it's not. But at any moment, you could easily see the connections to why the show is good for a child's learning and understanding, and while they're really entertaining. So with a Paw Patrol, it's like everybody wants to be the next Paw Patrol. Like everybody would love that secret sauce of how do you get to be, but it is that magic of making content. You will never know until you know whether you have the next big hit. But that show as well, if you are a parent and you've watched it and you've actually leaned in and listened to the program and got beyond those cute puppies, you will see that there are learning outcomes in there and that the knowledge that is there is entertaining while enlightening and giving them knowledge to use.
接下来我想要听一下来自挪威的例子。那我也分享一个我个人的经验。在2017年的时候，我到挪威去采访，当时有一个叫做 Trent 2017，是萨米人他们在1917年开第1届萨米大会的100周年的纪念。当时我采访了挪威萨米分支的这个电视台的台长 Mona， 他告诉我在4个不同国家的这个境内， 加起来大概有10万个萨米人，分别是挪威、瑞典、芬兰跟俄罗斯的科拉半岛。那其中欧洲的3个这个挪威、瑞典、芬兰的萨米人，分别就由他们3个公共电视 NRK、SRT 跟 YLE 每天会合制30分钟的内容，专属萨米人。其中有15分钟就是以萨米语播报新闻，那另外15分钟跟我们今天的主题有关，就是儿少节目。我想要请教，是什么样的背景让儿少节目它可以在一天这么稀有的时段里面占1半的时间？那挪威的公共电视，我们知道 Kalle 在当时正是 NRK Super， 就是挪威儿童频道的创办人。你能不能帮我们稍微讲一下这个背景，同时也回应刚才第一个我们提到的问题，在儿少节目上兼顾娱乐性跟知識性是可以并行不悖的。
I come from Norway, which is a small country in the northern part of Europe. It's still a lot of snow, especially in the Sami area. And I've been there a lot. My best experience was when it was 48 degrees cold Celsius. And that is very cold. We put a lot of resources, NRK, which is a public service company financed by the parliament, not commercials, only money from the parliament. And we put a lot of resources into the Sami radio and television, and also for children's program. Some of it are made locally in Karasjok, and some of it are made in cooperation with NRK Super, the children's channel in Oslo. And for, I think that every program should be entertaining. If it's a boring program, nobody wants to watch it. I don't want to watch a boring program for adults. So why should children watch boring programs for children? Because it's educational. So you have to make good programs, entertaining programs with a good content. And for me, coming from a small country with its own language, but with a big influence from Britain, from United States, it's very important to make local content with local language. And as you said earlier today, children today, they use television or streaming or whatever you call it, what you are watching on your computer or your mobile or your television set. It doesn't matter. But this is the part of giving them a kind of identity. They learn from what they are seeing. And the best way to have your own identification is to have an identification which is connected to your culture, to your language. And not as if you make your identification from a Disney cartoon, then you will be a puppet and you will be easy to manipulate. If you are able to watch local content in Norway with Norwegian children, we are very close to Denmark and Sweden. We have the same language, so we use a lot of cooperation. And it's easy for us to dub a Swedish program because the surrounding is very near to the Norwegian. And you can make your own program, your local identity. You can see that it's recorded in Taiwan and not in the United States. Even they have some Chinatown in the United States, but it's not the same. So I think that is For me, it's one of the most important aspects of making television, that you give the children a possibility to rise their identity based on their own local culture and language.
非常感谢 Kalle， 因为他不仅点出前面我们讲2个关于儿童节目很重要的元素，同时他也提出了今天我们想要特别强调的一个重点：这样的儿童节目必须是本国制造。那接着我也想要请教，很多在第一线的同仁或者是身为电视台，我们会遇到一个困境：一天的节目表，它在这么有限的时间里面。我们既要节目有娱乐性，我们既要节目有知识性，它又要本国制造，但很多时候这些元素是相互冲突的。比方说，我现在手边有一个非本国自己做的节目，它充满了娱乐性，充满了知识性，它很受年轻观众的欢迎。那同时间，我也有一个我们自己本国制造的节目。它跟我们的国家认同，跟我们自己的本土文化有很深的连结。在有限的时间频谱里面，我们要怎么样去做取舍？我不知道是不是诸位在你们的国家，在你们之前的这个经验里面，也遇过这样的dilemma。
I can speak on behalf of well, not all of Canada. How about Ontario, which is a province within Canada? One of the wonderful realities of kids consuming content right now is that, good or bad, their attention span wants shorter. So what was 22-minute show has become an 11-minute show, and 11-minute shows become 7, 7's become 5, which means they expect you to make a high-quality, entertaining, engaging 5-minute show versus a half hour. It would take an awful lot. It would have to be like the Australian have shown us remarkable dramas that will keep them longer. But for most programs, they are getting shorter. So you have an opportunity to put local shows in between other shows. So it is that opportunity to take the moment, and they often will like a show they just didn't know they were going to like. So if that show is well produced and has the same sort of high production values that other longer format shows have, you have the chance to highlight local stories, local children, local important issues. But if it's a shorter show, it can go in between longer shows that potentially maybe they came and that's what they thought. Paw Patrol's a perfect idea. They came to watch Paw Patrol. But, you know, after that or before that show, can you have an opportunity to put a shorter show in there that is highlighting some of your local stories that you want your children to know? It's certainly how TVO ended up scheduling their linear broadcast channel, but even on their website platform where the children control what they want to watch, or on their YouTube channels where they control, you still get to curate those channels so you can choose where to put them so they aren't at the very back of the list. You can put them more at the front of the list, so there's an opportunity that maybe if that thumbnail looks really inviting, they'll click on it, and then all of a sudden they'll see a child that looks like them and they think, oh, who's this? And so I think it's just, the first part is you have to make quality, good stories, whether they're nonfiction or fiction, and then hopefully make it accessible.
在我们听 Jenny 来自澳洲的意见之前，我想先追问 Marney 一个问题。刚好我们现场有观众也问了类似的问题，就是当现在的儿少他其实节目的来源选择有这么多的时候，多数的时候他选择并不是由电视台，不是由原本我们在做这一些第一线的从业人员做的节目内容，反而会从现在网络上的短影音去做收视。那原本我们会以为这一类你说把节目的时间缩短，我们会以为短影音可能会是我们这一些电视从业人员的一个威胁，但照Marney 刚才的这个分析，事实上我们反而可以从中来拟出一个新的策略，而不尽然把它视为是一个挑战或威胁。
Again, a very good question with a lot of different answers. And around the world, this is the same, all public broadcasters around the world are struggling with the same issue. And I think you're correct that potentially trying to always look at it with a new perspective, trying to not think that what we decided 6 months ago has to be what we decide today. We, as creators and gatekeepers, need to be nimble, need to make sure that we think about how, as the times change, how do we change how we think? But that said, I think it is the real, and again, this is my bias, but the value of preschool content really will help you feel confident that if you have a strong preschool content that's created that represents the children that you're focused on, you will be able to know that by the time they are age 7, 8, when they all start to move on and they're choosing to be on YouTube, their parents are no longer choosing everything. You've also influenced them to understand what quality is, to understand what is really riveting content. So although they may not know how to articulate that, they have been exposed to it, so therefore they become a bit of a connoisseur of what they want. So there will be, without question, potentially a time period where they aren't necessarily loyal to whatever the channel that is the local public broadcast ideas and channels, but realistically, they still have those memories of their childhood. It's a bit like what Jenny was saying. You've impacted them. It's imprinted in them of what was, programming that really connected and related to them. So as they grow older, they have a chance that they can see opportunities and different public broadcasters are choosing to have TikTok bits, they're choosing to be on YouTube, and they're finding ways to connect differently. So a lot of it comes down to who is the target audience and what is the age of that audience, to the vision and the decisions that should be made to affect it. But it is challenging, and it is a universal, international challenge.
关于这个部分，我们是不是听听 Jenny 分享我们在澳洲的经验？
I'd say there is good news and bad news. As Marney said, this is an issue that certainly the public broadcaster in Australia is grappling with and exploring the opportunities both to make content, for that short form content, and actually do put it out on TikTok and YouTube rather than their own channel. There's also the opportunity, I guess, to promote via those channels to try and bring the audience back to the content on their own websites or apps or linear channel. But the other side of the coin is there's a bit of a trend at the moment to going back to the big screen and co-viewing with children and families co-viewing together. This took off during COVID, and we had a presentation at the ACTF recently from a research company that researched, I don't know, Bernadette, it was 15 countries around the world, I think, where they found that this concept of going back to watching longer, deeper, more immersive programs as a family had really started to take off during lockdown. So I think it's about accepting the two things. It's about accepting that there's a lot of short form content out there, that people are engaging with their screens, but that it doesn't actually mean they'll never come back or they're never watching the more high-end quality content. I think we have to juggle these two things, but promotion of content to let the audience know that it's there, and discoverability, making it easy for them to find it, they are definitely two of the fundamental questions that people putting out content on any platform today have to deal with.
刚才在 Jenny 的简报当中，我也看到一个画面哈，就是我们有在 ACTF 所产制的内容当中，我们也看到关注了 NITV， 就是在澳洲的原住民。那关于这一点，其实在台湾我们有几个族群电视，那我们各自在自己的文化跟自己想要保有的这个珍贵的语言上做了很多的努力。 事实上也遇到了很多的挑战。那包括刚才我们跟 Kalle 在讲到在萨米的部分，他们人数更少，我相信也更加的艰巨。在加拿大一样也有原住民，然后还有在魁北克语区说法语要保有法语的这个议题，是不是能够针对这一点，请3位稍微提一下公共体系，不管是公共广播或是公共电视，在儿少影视产业在诸位3个国家扮演的角色？我们是不是从Kalle开始？我们谈一谈挪威的例子。
Once, please,
I would like to know what's the role of public broadcasting services play in Norway, in particular with a specific interest in the children's programs producing.
In Norway, we have a lot of television channels, commercials, and one public service, which is NRK 1, 2, and 3. But there is no one who are nearly. We still have some schedule, but for children and youth, they don't use the schedule. They do all the watching by streaming. And for NRK Super, a lot of the watching is also on YouTube. They put their programs on YouTube, and they put their programs on TikTok. So we have to cope with the future. To be a part of it. The funding of NRK is done by the Parliament, and we are the only one who produce children's program. And I come back to that a little bit later today, how this is controlled. Not the content, but that we spend enough money on children's program, and that we put at least 40% of the budget to independent producers. So we in Norway, NRK is the only station that make content for children. So we have a kind of, we are the founding like you are, but we are also the broadcaster. So we have a combined situation, which in a way make it a little bit easier. Because we are doing both part of it. And when I launched the children's channel and then I stopped in NRK, I thought it was better to stop when you manage to do something than if they ask you to stop because you don't manage to do something. But they have been running now for 15 years, and they are successful. And they are one of the few channels in Norway that, especially around Christmas, they have a higher score than YouTube. And the rest of the year, they are a little bit under YouTube, but before Netflix. So they are number 2 and number 1. And I'll come back later today the strategy for this, because the strategy is in a way one part is to build on your branding, your established branding for children, which in Norway is one of very popular puppets. It's also to make a lot of quantity. So we make series with 7 seasons of 40 episodes, drama series, and also quality. In the Christmas time, we put a lot of resources into a 24 episodes Christmas calendar, and I think we spend around 10% of the budget totally for these 24 episodes. So it's a mix of quality and quantity and branding, which they have succeeded to keep the interest of the children and youth, even the teenagers.
这边我刚好有这个 ACTF 从你们这个网站 这个资料上，我看到一句话，你们提到儿童收看的影视内容，同时是一面镜子，也是一扇窗户。这一点，我想要了解，跟我们现在提这个问题，比方说就澳洲多数的这个儿童观众而言，为什么要让他收视有关于澳洲原住民的内容？这件事情的重要性是什么？他想要反映什么价值？
This is very fundamental. It goes to all of us in Australia understanding our incredibly diverse population. And one of the, in the last 10 years, there's been quite a revolution in that regard. When I grew up in suburban Melbourne, I had very little understanding of Australia's First Nations people who seemed to live a long way away from where I was. And as we've evolved as a nation in the last 50 years, we've learnt that there isn't one particular Indigenous nation. We have many First Nations all over Australia with different cultural backgrounds, different stories, different languages. This is actually a journey our country has been on, a very, very important journey. And so with the National Indigenous Television Channel, NITV, it's only 10 years old. And it is showing programs from First Nations people all over the country. It also buys First Nations content from other countries. And there's this real push now to have many different programs featuring First Nations children, because some First Nations children live in really remote areas, some live in the top end of Australia, some live in our inner cities in public housing or in normal housing like the rest of us. So you can't have one show and say there's our First Nations children's program. We actually need an array of those programs, as well as First Nations characters in all other children's programs. It is very much, I think, a revolution, and the most dramatic change and important change in the last 10 years is to have so much First Nations content. But I might also add that our screen agency that invests in adult film and television has been investing in First Nations filmmakers for maybe 25 or 30 years, and some of our very best directors and performers and producers of general film and television content in Australia are actually First Nations people. So that's been a wonderful gift in the sense of there being so many very accomplished practitioners. It's not as though we're always working with complete beginners. Of course, in every children's show, the actors are normally complete beginners, but there is a lot of talent to actually help make those programs very, very good.
Please.
Canada is embracing the same philosophies as Australia. We would be the same way, a very diverse country. In my explanation is a bit complicated in the sense that when you think of a public broadcaster, we have CBC and the French CBC, which is SRC, Radio Canada, and so they are national, and so they'll have their mandates of what programming they're doing. We have APTN, which is our Aboriginal People's Television Network, and then every different provinces have the smaller EdNets is what we're kind of linked together, and that means we're funded by, when I was at TVO, it's funded by the Ministry of Education. So each broadcaster would have kind of a common theme of how are you going to make sure you're embracing the diversity of Canada and representing all people, but at the same time, it's individual to the vision and the mandate of that particular broadcast channel. So at TVO Kids, we were very lucky. We did a series that was called Raven's Quest, which was a 7-minute show just highlighting wonderful Indigenous Canadian kids. And in season 1, they did Ontario, kind of Quebec kids, because it was a French company, even though it was an Ontario co-production. But then, you know, as you got to season season 2 and season 3, you realized you were not doing Jude justice unless you traveled all across Canada, which then suddenly made it a more expensive budget. Because although it was a small budget, well, a medium small budget at the beginning, to be inclusive meant you also had to support them to the challenges that independent production has, which is remote communities are hard to fly into. They need to be working a little, you know, it's just more, the challenges are different, but also together they that particular production and other productions that TVO had done, and holistically, CBC and APTM would be the same, is ensuring that it is not just representation in front of the camera, but it's also behind the camera. Very much like you were saying, Jenny, that the initiatives are not enough, but they're slowly growing, and they are some incentive programs that are out there to make sure that all inclusion is more than just we saw people on the screens. It is the inclusion holistically.
在刚刚3位回答关于儿童影视产业跟我们的本土认同之间的关系的同时，我不知道大家有没有发现，一直提到一个字，就是 diversity 多元。那事实上，这正是我下一个问题。多元的形式不是只有在节目的内容得以呈现。我想要请教，因为3位都有跟公共媒体合作的经验，或是本身就一直在公共媒体任职。那在儿童影视产业这条路上，政府投资的这个公共媒体、政府资助的公共媒体，以及跟私人的这一些制作公司合作的重要性为何？那在合作上，它能够带给儿童影视产业什么样的帮助，或是让儿童影视产业可以展现出哪些原本只有公共媒体可能没有办法展现的面貌？
Sorry, it just took a little bit of time for your question to come
Taking your time, not the problem.
Would you mind?
Not a problem. I want to know how private section collaborate with public media in producing children's program, and what's the importance of that?
So public agencies like us collaborating with
ABC, NRK,
NITV. I guess it's really fundamental. The way it works in Australia is that the public broadcaster doesn't usually fully fund the programs that it screens. So it collaborates with us or with the main screen agency. It also sometimes collaborates with the NITV, which is at there. I should stop and explain. We have 2 public broadcasters, the ABC, which is the main one, and then SBS, which stands for Special Broadcasting Service. And this is a bit of an anachronism now, because back in the day when SBS was set up in the 1980s, it was set up to be the multicultural channel. That meant everything on the mainstream channel, I guess, was assumed to be very Caucasian or, you know, coming from an Anglo-Saxon background. And on SBS, they put on the Vietnamese programs or the Italian programs or the Greek programs or the Chinese programs. There's a little bit of an idea that we need to provide something for all of the migrants coming to Australia. Now you'd have to argue that we have a great multicultural country and we have diversity within all our programs. So the purpose for SBS is a little bit different. It's really become perhaps the more adventurous and cutting-edge public broadcaster, but one of its channels is NITV. So that's just to explain. But sometimes the ABC has to collaborate with SBS or NITV. Other times they collaborate with us. But we seem to have this fundamental philosophy in Australia that we can't regulate the ABC. There's an assumption that they will do Australian content and children's content because they are the public broadcaster. And that's really why you have public broadcasting. But the actual requirements to do Australian content have been put onto commercial broadcasters because otherwise they probably wouldn't do it. It's kind of how it works. I'm not sure if I've answered your question though.
I guess yes.我也想要听一下 Kalle 在 NRK 任职这么长的时间，那现在你是一名专业的儿童影视内容的顾问，私人的或是商业的这一些影视的制作公司跟公共媒体合作的重要性，能不能从你个人的经验以及你接触过的案例来跟我们分享
？In Norway, as I told you, NRK Super has the budget, which is high, and for at least 40% of that budget should go to independent producers. And this is, and then they come in with their manuscript, with their ideas, and we develop it. And in a way, it's very simple to make good television. If you have money, and you have talent, and you have ideas, and you have some decisions makers which are able to say that this is a good idea, and this is a talented director, and here is the sum of money that you are able to spend, then very often it comes out with a good result. But in Norway, from 30 years ago, there was nearly only Norwegians and Lappish people living in the country. Now we are a multicultural country. We have a lot of people coming from Asia, from India, from refugees from other countries in Middle East and in Africa. So we are a multicultural country, and this has to be reflected in the way we cast for children's program and adult program as well. And I think we have managed to have a variety of children taking part in documentaries and in drama series with a different background. And I also, I'm doing some workshop in Asia on how to work with children, how to cast children for drama, how to train them for being actors, because they are not born actors, they have to be trained. And this is also for me, it's very important that you have to find some way. If you cast the right children, you have reached more than halfway to the goal to make a success. And if you train them a little bit, then you will have good actors as well. And you have to look for, and that's a little bit complicated these days when you wear your mask, yeah? But you have to look for a face that impress you immediately. And that is the way that you have to look for the children who can be a star on the screen.
It's interesting because I think as Taiwan looks to determine what the funding model will be to support content created for children, it is trying to look at the whole versus what I mean by that is, for TVO, we were always lucky that we could be in on international co-productions, which is like when you were asking about working with, most of those would be animations often, and they take a very long time to do, but you could be still influencing those animated properties by saying, you wanted more diversity on the screen, you wanted to have girl characters that were strong and smart in math or science, you could make an impact from the core values and ethics of the station that you're with. But at the same time, so some money can go to international large productions. If you're fortunate, you can be in on large drama productions, and again, impact who is cast for them, making sure you see body diversity, that it isn't all the same characters being cast everywhere. But it's also important that you have some resources put towards your local, which again is how your own children see themselves on the screen. And those programs may well travel around the world, but at the end, the intention is that you're impacting, for those of us at TVO, it was first the kids of Ontario and then the kids of Canada. And then if that, because when we would do programs, we only owned the rights for Canada. They could sell that program anywhere they wanted in the world, and some of them do sell around the world, and some of them sell in Australia, the same way Australian shows sell in Canada. But at the end of it, when that show was being created, it was about reflecting the diverse characters, the diversity of thought, of body type, of all of the difficult part when we use the word of diversity and inclusion, making sure we were holistically looking at it. But I think that public broadcasters have the opportunity of impacting that on a commercial level, because when they do go into larger budgeted programs where they need many people at the table, they still have a voice and they still can help. It may take a while to impact it, but they have a possibility of impact.
其实不管是从怎么样的衡量标准来看，三位都提到一件事情，就是节目的品质，儿少节目的品质永远是摆在第一。那我相信在座有很多儿少节目的从业人员，我们常会问自己一个问题：我已经尽我最大的努力来确保这个节目的品质了。那当我在做这个节目的时候，我要把这个节目怎么接触到最多人？或者是要怎么样让更多人认可我认为我尽最大力做出最好品质的这个产品，就是对节目的制作人或是第一线的工作人员而言，行销是他们在做节目的时候要放进去的元素吗？我想听听三位的经验。
Was that addressed to me? Yeah.
To all of you.
Okay, well, I'll start. Yes, I think marketing and promotion is incredibly important, and the broadcasters or the platforms that do best are definitely the ones that are reaching out and letting the audience know about their content. It's also about consistency and having a large number of programs or a consistent destination or block where people go to. This is why with NITV, for example, we wish to support them to do a number of programs, because if they just drop one children's program on their channel during the year, then children aren't going to know to go to that channel to find children's content. So it's having a critical mass of good children's programs, and it's definitely promotion. But the final thing I would say is that we must measure it a little bit differently than we measure programs for adults. Whether you're a platform like Netflix or something and you're dropping a big show like The Crown or Squid Game or whatever it is, there's a lot of energy around that when it first comes out, and then it's off and we've moved on to the next show. But with children's shows, maybe the audience is smaller and maybe they're not as loud, maybe it won't generate all of the same level of noise that a big primetime show will generate. But very often, children will come back to it again and again, and it will grow an audience, or a new group of children will find it when it's on again the following year. So I always think it's a little bit unfair when we measure a response to a children's show in the same way that we measure a response to an adult show. And I would say sometimes our film agency that invests in content in Australia, Screen Australia, will argue, well, not as many people watched that show, that children's show that launched last year compared to that adult show. But I can always turn around and say, but you wait 10 years, no one will remember that adult show that you funded, but that children's show, the ABC will still be showing it and the audience will still be watching it.
If you don't mind, I want Marney go first.
Well, I was going to say I would totally agree on that part, because that is the wonderful part. Guess what? They grow up and there's new kids and they think those shows are new still. So it is a wonderful reality of children. I was thinking back to the creators in the audience, to how under the marketing area, how it is key that your shows can be found. And all I can do is reference when we were at TVO, and as the world kept changing and the in-house team at TVO remained small, of 5 people, the demands of what was required to be on multiple platforms kept changing. And one of the things that we recognized was, because the in-house team wasn't growing larger in the marketing departments and whatnot, that the creators of the content knew their shows the best. So we started changing the deliverables that were asked for, such as they delivered the thumbnails. Now, you could work somewhere and maybe deliver your thumbnails, and maybe they wouldn't be used, but you're no worse off. You really, from editing that show, know what is the absolute best picture from that episode, so why not be the one who selects it? And the broadcaster or the person who has licensed your show, they can put it in the wrapping of the brand of where it's going, but you've given them the opportunity to have the best thumbnail. It's the same as a log line. Originally, people were saying, oh, we can rewrite them. But if you're delivering a series of, 52 episodes, nobody in-house probably has the bandwidth to write 52 wonderful log lines, but you do, because it's your show and you know it well and you want that show to be successful. So whether it's fair or not, because it becomes more work for the poor content creators, but the more as you deliver your end content to whoever it is you're giving it, who you've licensed it to, and you hope that it would have its success from, the more that you provide a package of, whether they're little tiny clips that would go on social media, the thumbnail is perfect, the log line is perfect, that really helps that kind of ability to keep it fresh, to keep it happening all the time, because the need to feed the beast of social media and online platforms is challenging for all companies, and it's hard for them to stay on top of it. So if you're just a small show amongst a sea of larger shows, it is an opportunity to get your own stuff elevated if you have you've provided it. It doesn't mean it's a guarantee, but it's an easier way to give you a chance because you've given them everything that you think is the best of the best, and then that might be the way that your show makes it a little bit more noticed because you made it easy.
从2位的回答，我深刻地感受到要接触到儿童观众的重要性，那比较像是 reach the children。我想进一步请教，那跟我们在做儿童节目的时候也常提到的一个点 ，connect with children 是一样的吗？我们又要怎么样让节目跟儿童产生连结，而不仅仅是让他们看到而已？
Wow.
Another wild question.
Long.
Well, we need to convince them that it's for them and that it's entertaining, and I guess that's exactly right, isn't it? So whether it's on social media, I mean, the picture, the show, the as Marnie says, the log line, it must speak directly to the audience. In fact, that's something where we can probably learn quite a lot from the streaming platforms, because their whole model is based on those algorithms where people are flicking through and choosing what to watch, and they've become very, very good at working out how precise a message needs to be. But yes, it is really, we need to get to the heart of the matter very quickly. Somebody said earlier, children only will watch something for 6 seconds and then move on to the next thing. So that's a whole new skill area, is getting the message through to children, and potentially also promoting programs to parents, but maybe because sometimes that's how a program will happen, and maybe that's 2 different ways of marketing a program, the same program.
I mean, children today, they don't watch television channels, they watch platforms. And their parents today, they grew up with NRK as the channel for their children's program. And they are still a kind of loyal to the Norwegian children's program. So usually they help their children when they start very early watching on the platforms to find the NRK platform. And there's a lot of programs there that you can choose to watch whenever you want, as everywhere else. But I think you have to use the connection between the parents and the children, because some years they have a kind of influence on what the children watch. And if they give them some good ideas, maybe they will help them to continue to watch the children's program from your own country. If they are entertaining and not boring.
I would agree with both of my colleagues that all of that is very true, as well as, again, when you're trying to be visionary and think about how you in the future hope to fund children's content, there is a fund in Canada called the Shaw Rocket Fund, which is, they're the only funder currently right now, beyond the government funds for children's content. But one of the requirements they have in their application program is discoverability. So the creators have to have a plan of how they believe that their show will get discovered. But when you're working with kids' content, that can be very unique and different. It could be that they plan to do kind of what Saturday out here will probably look like, with lots of real kids in real life. They plan to take the stars of their show out across the country and meet real kids. They plan to, do different contests. They plan to use social media as age appropriately different than how you might to an adult. But they also could turn around and want to do a family contest that, again, would be appropriate for social media for all of the intended audience. So I think when you're working in kids' content, you have to understand that you need to engage and make the children curious of what the program is and make them want it, but at the same time, making adults aware it exists, making adults aware this could be fun, this could be co-viewing, this might be a show that, hey, this is, I'm okay watching this, is critical as well. So your marketing strategy might be a multiple strategy.
在我们进入 Q&A 的阶段之前，我们大概还有2分钟的时间。我是不是让3位讲者用30到45秒的时间，稍微总结一下上午我们这一场论坛有没有特别要补充，或是提醒我们现场所有的观众的？我们就从 Kalle 开始好吗？
Make good programs with local content.
你给了其他2位更多的时间。
I just think it's an important thing to get the entire screen industry engaged in children's content, and to encourage people who may be used to doing primetime content to consider doing their best work for children. They might be surprised how satisfying they find that is.
Marney.
I would say that making content for kids will be the best thing you ever get a chance to do. So I would advocate that you continue to lobby for funding, because it does take money to make good shows. The larger the budget, unfortunately or fortunately, typically means the more of it's seen on the screen, because you have the resources to work with. But it is the best kept secret. Those of us who are fortunate to have worked our lives in kids' content are the lucky ones. And the adult community of creators are just catching up to realize how much fun we have. But we are opening the doors to them to join the fun if they want to get down and work at a level where children are, and get messy and dirty and laugh and engage the children that they're working with, or tell the stories that children need to be hearing. I think anybody can be creating the content, but they will always need the support of resources and funding to make it.
在我们进行问答之前，是不是先给3位讲者一轮热烈的掌声？那我们开放现场的所有人都可以提问，也可以透过我们这个 QR code 用文字的方式来表达。我会在台上为大家读出你们的问题。我们是不是在看这一些文字的问题之前，我们先让现场的这个观众可以举手发问？
哦，不好意思，我再介绍一下，我是玉生动画总导演。 那因为我自己也在做儿童动画节目的部分了，我想了解就是在教育这一块怎么跟就是现在政策里面跟儿童教育绑在一起，在他们的国家里面。
Well, I can speak for TVO Kids projects. When you had when any program was greenlit, animated or live action, they work with an educator from the very beginning. If they don't have that relationship with an educator from the very beginning, then the learning becomes the sort of learning that we all don't like. It's the didactic, it's put in at the end, it's squeezed in, and it isn't embedded and baked into the show. So the best recommendation I would ever give is find somebody who has the subject matter expert of what you're looking to connect to the program you're making, and have them on your creative team from the beginning. They don't need to be there all the time, but they need to be there to help guide the writing room to understand what it is that you wanted children to learn, or what was the takeaway? What was the one thing that you hoped they would remember after watching your show? It could be emotional intelligence. They're not always, ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, that is your intention of a learning outcome. But if you can find an educator who has the right credentials and fits your team, I would recommend you bring them from the very beginning. And then at the end, they can watch a rough cut and they can be in your focus testing working with children to see did they understand what you wanted.
Please.
I think we're a little bit different in Australia. If a program is actually intended to have some particular information in it, then we would always involve an expert in the subject right from the very beginning. An animation that was produced recently about a family travelling in space was intended to have a whole lot of actual factual content in it. So I was going to say astrologers, astronomers were involved in the development of that show. But very often we steer a little bit clear of educators, but at the end, when a program is finished, we will often look at that program with an education team, and they'll develop our ancillary materials around it so that that program is used in schools. But we really focus on the entertainment and the drama and the depth of the storytelling rather than try and work out what our educational message is in every single show.
In Norway, which is a very small country, we don't spend much money on we don't spend much money on animation, because we can buy animation from all over the world and dub it. We want to make program with live children, so we don't spend much money on that. And to be honest, we closed down our education department because they made so boring program. And I was one of the decision makers who made it close down. But we have a kind of NRK school where we put different kind of programs that are suitable for learning on different age. So you can, on our platform, pick out what you want, but we don't spend much money on nearly nothing on animation, and very little on education, but we use documentaries, nature programs, things like that, which they can, and of course news and things like that, to educate the children.
Kalle, allow me to add, compared to Taiwan, Norway isn't that small. OK， 我们现在有很多在线上提问，比方说有一位这个提问者提到，请问各国政府的政策资金投入多少影视内容的金额大约是多少？那在产业上是不是也会有资金，包括电信商也会投资3位来自的不同的国家的儿童影视产业吗？那你们的儿童影视产业有没有转译或是延伸的方式？包括书籍、漫画或是表演艺术。
Okay, I'm starting. So there were questions there about, I'm almost going to go backwards. The last question was, do we have publishers and people like that investing in children's content? And I'd say yes, there's a very strong literary tradition, children's books in Australia. And then it was the telecommunications industry, whether they were investing perhaps in the way that Momo Mini has its platform here. And my answer to that would be no. I think maybe the telecommunications sector is an interesting new avenue to explore, but they have not to date invested very much in children's screen content. It's very much been the public broadcasters, the commercial broadcasters, and now the new streaming platforms, Netflix. There's an Australian streaming platform called Stan. There are a number of them who have begun to invest in children's programs. And then I think if I go back to the beginning of the question, there was a question about budgets and the kind of budgets that we have to invest in children's programs. And I would say every program has a budget that works for that program. Some of them, they're potentially surprisingly expensive. In recent years, production costs in Australia have risen very high because we've got a lot of big foreign movies and television series from around the world coming to shoot in Australia, and that has the impact of driving up the crew costs on productions because people work across all sorts of formats. But some shows, I guess, have I don't even understand the exchange rate very well. But I guess I'd say some shows have very modest budgets, and then there are some that have got really almost equivalent adult primetime drama budgets. And then the broadcasters themselves would usually contribute about 20% of the cost of that budget. There's a tax incentive in Australia for television where a producer gets a tax rebate of 30% of the cost of a budget. So there's about 50% of the budget has come through the tax system and the public broadcaster. And then an organisation like us or a screen agency or whatever might invest the balance. If a production has a really, really high production budget, we might need an international partner, someone to pre-buy the show internationally or agree to distribute it internationally. But we try often not to have to do that because the real focus is making sure that a show works for Australian children before it goes off around the world. But yes, it's complicated is probably the best answer in terms of budgets and how it's funded.
I would say the budget process is somewhat similar, small, medium, large, depends upon how big your order is, how long the show is. Broadcasters in Canada still traditionally use the half-hour broadcast, the license fee. But if you're making a 7-minute show, you may be working with a broadcaster who would be generously agreeing that 3 episodes equals half an hour. Now, we really know that's only 21 minutes, and my accounting person once asked why we didn't have 4 episodes equal to half an hour, because if I did a math show, I should know these things. But really, at the end of it, often we compromised on saying 3 episodes was a half an hour license fee because it was the empathy towards how challenging it is for creators to make their financial plans work. That no matter where you're creating around the world, that is the toughest job of a creator, is to cobble together a financial plan that will move them forward. In Canada, very similar, we have the producer can get tax credits. A broadcaster comes on board and gives a license fee. If you're fortunate, you may get some funding from like the Shaw Rocket Fund that's there. Canada Media Fund is a large fund that, again, the gatekeepers are broadcasters. They have to decide who they want to give their portion of the envelope to. If you're lucky, your show would get some of that. And then when in doubt, the larger the show, the more realistic it's a co-production. Because again, straight Canadian shows are typically the smaller budget shows, which could be somewhere around, 500,000 Canadian, but it's a local 5 to 7 minute show of profiling children, doing real stuff in their lives. If you were in a large show, like if you wanted to do Odd Squad or Dino Dana or something, those shows end up where they have to be either with Amazon or PBS. If it's an animated property like Wildcrats, they all, for us, fortunately, being North American, we can be with an American partner. It wouldn't be a co-production because there's rules against that as well, but the kind of accent and castings are a little bit easier than it would be in different countries.
Yeah, and we have some foundations. The Norwegian Film Foundation, which is we can apply for money if we don't have the right budget. We also do a lot of co-productions between Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland, and we have the foundation originally based on the cable that brought television from Norway to Sweden. Then they have to pay a fee, and this was put into a foundation. And now it's a new way of establish this foundation, but we can apply for that, which, if you have a good idea for a production that could be brought to the other Nordic countries, then you can have a lot of money from that. And also we have some production that are financed by Netflix, for example. So there is opportunities if you have a good idea and good people and good manuscript. And
容我稍微说明一下，因为我们早上这一场的主题是国家政策跟公共电视，所以其实有很多提问是跟下午的场次比较相关，我们就留到下午的时候来回答。那因为时间的关系，我们最后一个问题，我觉得这个问题非常的重要。前面3位提了很多这个很实际的做法，那我觉得心灵上的鼓励也很重要。很多这个从业人员想要知道，在你们倡议儿童节目这一条路上有没有什么样的挫折？那有没有什么让你感受到最激励人心的时刻？ What frustrates you, and what encourages you?
Over the years, I think the best thoughts I would say is reminding yourself to be all those wonderful words like nimble, agile, pivot, because it's true. The world keeps changing. Technology changes how our children are consuming content, but at the end of the day, the children and child development are constant. So it is the ability to try to create content that is meaningful, has stories to be told, but also enjoying it and being open to the next generation of creators and recognizing that they will bring different ideas to the table with a different approach. And sometimes it will work and sometimes it won't work, but I'm sure if we were turn back the hands of time when we started, whoever was the gatekeeper at that time thought the very same thing.
Jenny.
Okay. The first thing in terms of what I've learned is that the job is never finished. And so my example of that, and possibly one of the biggest frustrations that I've ever had, is that I said earlier that the ABC, the public broadcaster, used to do much less Australian content than the commercial broadcasters and did a whole lot of imported programming. So we lobbied and went to Parliament for 3 or 4 years to argue that the ABC should have special funding to establish its children's channels. It's when we were setting up, when digital television was taking off. And the ABC ended up being given a very large amount of additional money for those children's channels. And I thought, fantastic, we've changed the world. And for a couple of years, we had changed the world, that it transformed what they were doing. But what I didn't know was within a couple of years, inside the ABC, people from other departments were saying, they've got too much money for children's television. They're spending too much on children's television. And behind the scenes, it was being taken away and spent on other shows. And it took us a little while to work out, they're not spending all that money on children's television anymore. Then there was a change of government and the ABC got funding cut and they started saying, we're not spending as much on children's because the government has cut our funding. But in reality, they had stopped spending all that money that we'd lobbied for before the change of government and before they lost their funding. So it kind of taught me that you can never stop and you can never take one win for granted. So that's the bad news. I think the encouraging news was the presentation we had from Gary Pope earlier this year. This was the research proposal about what's happening. And he said a new generation of savvy parents all over the globe are pushing back a little bit about the distraction of screens, and they were aware of the dangers of social media because they're so much more savvier than earlier parents when this was all new, and that they were valuing family time watching together. And I feel very encouraged by that new generation of parents, and think that it means that the future is still bright for really high quality content for children that will be valued.
Kalle.
What have I learned? I've learned that it was much more funny to be a director than to be a head of the children's department. And I've also learned that it's hard to be a decision maker. But if you are a decision maker, you have to make decisions. And even if people don't like your decisions. So I learned that I have to pick out the talent and invest in the talent and give them an opportunity to show that they were talent. And if they weren't talent, I reduced their possibilities. But for those who I said, I don't believe in you, when I meet them out in the city or in the shop, they don't, they turn their back to me, so they don't want to greet me. So this is a part of being a decision maker. People don't like you, sometimes.
I like you. Indeed, it's a long revolution, and let's keep working together. 热烈掌声好吗？